All right, we are trucking along, discussing anatomy and physiology. And today we're going to start chapter 22, which deals with the respiratory system and the circulatory system. And those two systems are intricately associated with one another, simply because, as we're going to talk more about, you'll need to understand that one of the main purposes of blood, which makes up a large part of the circulatory system, is to transport oxygen to your organs and throughout your body, and then also to bring back waste products like carbon dioxide. Now, that all has to happen through blood. So oxygen, respiratory system, travels through your body via blood in the circulatory system. So you really can't talk about one of those systems without discussing the other. So these two are combined for that very purpose. You just can't have one without the other. So what we need to talk about is, if you remember way back near the beginning of the year, we had a very lengthy section of biology dealing with cellular processes like photosynthesis in plants, but cellular respiration and animals. And this all ties back to that process as well. The whole purpose of cellular respiration is to make oxygen, okay? And then we want to get rid of carbon dioxide. So what we have to do is we have to take in our oxygen. We don't make oxygen, so we have to take in our oxygen, and our cells use that and they give off carbon dioxide. Now the question is, and we didn't really talk about that until now, is how do we get the oxygen other than from plants? How does it enter our body and make it and become usable to us? And then how does it get to all the parts of our bodies and all of our cells so that all of our cells can undergo cellular respiration, do what the cells need to do in order to keep us alive, providing us with energy in the form of ATP, etc. And then helping us get rid of that waste product. Because I'll tell you, it's not just that our pores and our skin open up and all of that waste product is released. And it's not because we're not plants. It doesn't work that way. Plants, they have the pores, they open up, waste product goes out. We don't have that. So how does it work? Well, that's what we have to talk about. So all of that stuff that we learned about with cellular respiration should sort of start to make even more sense. Hopefully it made some sense back then. Hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense now as we talk about how we actually intake that oxygen and get it where it needs to go throughout our body. So when you talk about the respiratory system, there are several parts to that. It's not just lungs. So the oxygen has to move into the lungs through the respiratory system, and then the circulatory system takes over and transfers that oxygen to the rest of the body. So I'm going to outline quickly the path that's going to be listed in steps, and then we're going to look at a page in your book where this goes into more detail, and we will discuss that. So the path is going to involve the nasal cavity, in through the pharynx, down to the epiglottis, through the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, lungs, bronchioles, alveoli, and capillaries, which are tiny blood vessels. So how does this all happen? On page, let me find it in your book. On page 430, I've just taken a picture of that, but page 430 in your textbook is this exact picture. And it goes through all of these details that we're going to discuss and all the different roles that these parts of the respiratory system play. So let me make this a little bit bigger in hopes that at least I can see it better, but maybe you can, or it'll help you as well. Okay, so again, this is page 430 in your textbook, but it starts in this whole process, the respiratory system, the trail that oxygen follows starts right here at number 1. So this is right, see where your nose and your mouth, this area right behind on your face where your nose and your mouth is, that is the nasal cavity. And a cavity is exactly what it sounds like. If you've ever had a cavity in your tooth, it's like a little hole. So behind your skin, you have your skull, but that makes it part of your facial structure. But there's also a lot of hollow space there. That's your nasal cavity. So when you, so this kind of tries to tell you a story to help you remember it a little bit better. So like pretend you're an oxygen molecule. That's kind of how we're going to go with this. It's easier to follow that way, but you're some oxygen, you're an oxygen molecule, and you're floating around the air, and you get breathed in through the nose. So yeah, that's kind of gross because there's a lot of stuff in your nose that you probably don't want to deal with. However, so the oxygen comes in through your nose, and it's here behind in the nasal cavity. So this is, like I just said, it's a hollow area in your head, and there's some epithelial tissue back there. And also tucked back in here are the sensory receptors that allow you to smell. And there's, as you know, what's in your nasal cavity, you always have a mucus lining. Sometimes you have more mucus than others, which is why it comes to when you have a cold and you need to blow your nose frequently, it's because you're making more mucus than normal. But there's mucus back there and tiny hairs. All right. So oxygen comes in through your nose and is back here in your nasal cavity. So that hollow area that's lined with tiny hairs, mucus, epithelial tissue, and it's making a nice, good environment for you to pass through. So you come zooming through here, and you hit this right here, the pharynx. It's at the kind of at the top of the, the very top or the beginning of your throat. Then you have to pass through a flap, basically, that opens and closes like a door. So this flap is called, and it's right here, the epiglottis. And this is very important because look what else is here. You have your nose and you have your mouth. So it's very critical that the air goes one way and the food goes another way because they both have to go down your throat. So the epiglottis right here is that flap. And this keeps food out of the lungs by shutting when you are swallowing food. Very important because it can cause, if this were not there, you would have major lung infections all the time because food should not ever go into your lungs. It's not the right environment for it. And there's nothing there to help in digestion. And so you would just have a rotting lung if that were to happen. So the epiglottis keeps food from going into your lungs. So when you're swallowing, this flap closes, the epiglottis, and food goes down the right pathway into your stomach instead of into your lungs. Very important. Okay, but once it's passed through and the air has gone the right direction, you hit the larynx right here. That's what it looks like. It's located here, but this is a blown up version or a blown up picture of that larynx. That's your voice box. So when a person speaks or sings, the air travels over those flaps, and those are called vocal folds. And it produces a sound. So from there, from your larynx, remember that's your voice box, it comes down here into the trachea. That's frequently referred to, the trachea, in everyday language as your windpipe. If you've ever heard someone say your windpipe, that's the trachea. And again, get a little bit of more moisture and a little more filtering. And there are tiny little hairs again and mucus that are lining this that allow the right things to move in the right direction and the way that you want things to go. Then we get down here. You pass through the trachea if you're an oxygen molecule. You go through the trachea, and there are bronchi right here. Singular is bronchus, but you have bronchi here. See, and it kind of splits in two. So there's one on each side, one each leading to a lung. So then so if we take this as a blown up picture of what's happening inside your lungs. All right, so this is coming out of your lungs. So you have the bronchi that lead into the lungs on either side of you. You have two lungs, one on each side. Then the bronchi branch into smaller tubes called bronchioles. And those are right here, number 8, right here. And you come to a dead end in these sacs here called, the plural is alveoli, or the alveolus. One of these is an alveolus. Then you come out with capillaries. They're teeny, teeny, tiny. It's actually very hard even to see these tips here, these capillaries wind around the alveoli. You can't even really see the capillaries. In your book, if you look really closely, they're trying to show you these little spiky things that are the capillaries. But those wrap around the alveoli, and that's what picks up the oxygen. And those capillaries are blood vessels. So these capillaries are the branch between the respiratory system and the circulatory system. Okay, then there's a little bit of function that we need to talk about. So this was mostly the anatomy, and we're not going to go a whole lot into detail of the physiology of this, other than knowing that there's a muscle involved. When you inhale, take in air, that's called inspiration. When you exhale, that's called expiration. And that involves the contraction of the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is located, right, it's a muscle between, and again, I did not include a picture of this in the notes on the PowerPoint, but on page 431, you'll see 2 images, and it's showing you inhalation and the process of inhalation and the process of exhalation. So when you breathe in, that's inspiration, a muscle under the lungs called the diaphragm contracts and becomes flatter. But at the same time, there are muscles between the ribs that contract to increase the volume of the chest cavity, and it allows your lungs to expand so you can take that air in. Then the opposite happens during expiration. So the diaphragm, the muscles between the ribs relax, reducing the volume in your chest cavity, and you push the air out. So that it works as a pressure situation. Generally, an adult can hold about 4.5 liters of air in their lungs. That an average person's lung capacity is 4.5 liters. So in a given breath, you're generally breathing in about 1/2 liter, in and out, in and out. If you take a really deep breath, like you're getting ready to jump into the pool, that gives you about a 3 liter expansion. And then when you deliberately, generally the average is 1/2 liter in, 1/2 liter out, 1/2 liter in, 1/2 liter out. When you really force the air out, you can force out about 1 liter at a time. So all that to say, all this whole process, as scientists have measured it back and forth, normal breaths in and out, deeper breaths in, forcing more breath out than normal. They've been able to calculate it as having a human being has about 4.5 liters of capacity in their lungs. All right, I will stop there for today. You'll have, once you finish watching this video, there'll be questions posted that you can answer. I would like for you to answer those. And